Hey guys, it's Julian from Beneath the Bunk Studios and BeneathTheBunk.com. I hope you're doing wonderfully. Today, we are talking about the best way to use noise gates on your drums by using key spikes. Let's get into it. So what I have in front of me is a really bare bones Pro Tools session just for the purposes of this video. All I have on this kick drum is an L1 limiter just to turn up the volume of it because it was pretty quiet. And this is what it sounds like. Just a super basic pattern that I did in Superior Drummer. Didn't give any thought to the sound or the pattern, just went with something just so I would have something to use. So obviously these are not live drums. I did use Superior Drummer like I said, but what I did use with Superior Drummer is the bleed function that plugin has, which allows you to simulate the bleed that would be incoming from other drums. So for example, the kick-in mic isn't just going to be the kick the way it would be if you had programmed drums. You would also hear little bits of snare in it. You would also hear little bits of cymbals in it, and that's why you hear things in the background of this kick drum. I'll play it again so you can pay attention to that. When the kick's not playing, you can still hear the other parts of the kit. Give a listen. For the purposes of this video, we're going to act like they're louder than they really are, and we're going to act like we really want to get rid of that stuff so that we only have the kick drum sound to worry about. The first thing we're going to do is do a consolidate. So to do that, you're going to do Alt-Shift-3 or Option-Shift-3 if you're on a Mac. And then I'm going to open up a stereo instrument track that has Superior Drummer 3 on it because that's what I like to use to convert my audio to MIDI. You can also use Slate Trigger. There are other options, Massey DRT for example. Once we're inside of Superior Drummer, we're going to go to the Tracker tab, click the Add button, and then find the session on my computer. Once I find the session, I'm going to go into the audio files, sort by date modified so that I could see the most recent audio file that was created, which was the consolidation of that kick drum, and then we're going to go and double click on this. So now we have the kick drum that you just saw in my DAW inside of Superior Drummer, and what you are seeing is individual white lines for each drum hit. And obviously I'm going to move around here and get these white lines to be more on the grid with the transients because sometimes they're not perfect. But right now it looks like they're pretty close. Now that we got through those, we're going to go to export. And we're going to make sure the tempo is correct, and I believe it is. It's at 120. Yes, I'm going to create a new stereo instrument track. You could also use a mono one. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to use a stereo one. Then I'm going to drag this window out of the way, move the MIDI that I just created over into this window, and boom, we have a MIDI representation of this performance right up here. Next, what I'm going to do is load up a synth onto this track. You could use any synth that you want, any stock synth that you have. I'm just going to use Serum because that's the synth that I know best. That's the synth that a lot of people know best, I'm sure. And I'm going to turn on a sine wave. So now I have a sine wave loaded up in Serum. I'm going to take up these MIDI notes a few octaves. Something that really important that you have to take into account once you've gotten the MIDI for your drum performance is that all of the velocities for all of the MIDI notes should be the exact same. So that's what I've done here. I've taken all of the velocities, maxed them out, and made sure that they're exactly the same. That's because consistency is very important here, and you'll understand why in a little bit. So now what we're left with is a really strange sounding synth representation of that kick drum performance, and it sounds like this. Select that, right click on here, do commit, and then make sure you have edit selection turned on, do nothing, offline, and then okay. Now we just have the same exact thing that you just heard in audio form. This is what it sounds like, same thing. And now what we're going to do is route that as a sidechain input to a noise gate that we're putting on the kick drum track. So if that sounds complicated, just bear with me. I promise it's not as complicated as it sounds. So we're going to go back to this kick drum track, the original one that we started with. We're going to go to the first insert slot, and we're going to just load up the stock Pro Tools gate because it's good enough for what we need. This next step is a Pro Tools specific thing. In Cubase, for example, you don't have to do this because it's already kind of done, but in Pro Tools, you do have to route your output of your thing that you want to use as a sidechain input to a separate bus so that you can select that bus within the input of the gate. Sounds a little bit complicated. Just skip this part if you are not using Pro Tools because you don't need this. But anyway, if you are using Pro Tools, you're just going to go to the outputs, go to output, bus rather, find an empty bus that isn't being used. For example, I'm just going to use this, and you have to use a mono one because the sidechain input of Pro Tools plugins only accepts mono inputs, I believe. So anyway, we got D sum L. I'm going to rename it to kick sidechain. And then we're going to go back into this gate. we're going to go where it says no key input, open it up, go to bus, and then we're going to find kick sidechain. I'm just going to search it actually because that's faster. And then just like that, we have the output of the audio weird synth sound getting sent to the input of the gate on the original kick. And then of course you have to make sure this key button is selected because that's telling it to listen to the sidechain. If that's not selected, the sidechain will not be working. Before you go any further, make sure that you are solo saving the audio track that has the routing to the noise gate, because what's going to happen is if you solo something and you're not solo saved, that track's going to get muted and it's not going to be triggering the gate properly. So we want to make sure it's always triggering the gate properly by hitting Control or Command and then clicking on the S. Next, set your attack value to the fastest it could possibly go. And the release is going to really be, the release and the range actually are really going to be where we put the most time into figuring out the settings that we want. Also the threshold. So you could already hear it working if you really listen closely to the cymbal getting cut off. You don't hear the snare at all in the background. It's really isolated now. At this point, it's really up to you and your preference how you want to set the gate. I would probably turn up this release a little bit so it doesn't sound quite so choppy, especially on a snare, because you want to let some of that snare decay through. The kick, I don't really need as much decay most of the time for the kind of music that I work on. Also, you could play around with the range. You know, if you don't want it to get muted that dramatically, you can dial it back. Or if you wanted to get muted even more, you could dial it all the way up. I'm going to keep it around somewhere in the middle near where it was already. Just remember with your threshold, you need to have it set low enough so that the synth notes can trigger it. So for example, you want to make sure that it's below the peaks, and the peaks are always going to be the same because the velocities are always the same. That's a really, really important thing to remember. So let's play it again. And you'll notice that the arrow is below these. If I put them above, it's kind of chopping a lot of the sound out. So you want to make sure it's low enough. And if it's low enough for one hit, it'll be low enough for them all because, like I said, all the velocities are exactly the same on the synth notes. That's pretty much it. Now we've got a really solid, really reliable gate that's always going to work perfectly in accordance with the kick drum performance. This is how I gate all of my drums. I don't like just slapping a gate on there and hoping that it catches everything because, you know, drumming is dynamic. Even if you're programming it, you're going to be wanting to use multiple velocity layers and stuff. So just because it is getting past the gate sometimes doesn't mean it will all the time, and then you're going to have to do additional automation and clip gain things, and you don't want to deal with that. I really recommend working this way because it's super reliable, super consistent, and then you're never going to have to worry about gating your drums throughout your session. You're just going to do it once while you're prepping, and then that's going to be that. That's all I got for today, guys. I really hope you got something out of this. If you did or if you didn't, let me know down below. If you're super confused about some stuff I said, let me know down below. I will answer all of your questions. I promise. If you have a better way of doing this than I do, tell me about it. If you don't and this really helped you, again, tell me about it. Don't be shy, and I'll talk to you later.